So again, today is an introduction to Maximo Calibration, enabling your calibration program inside of IBM Maximo. The agenda of what's going to be covered in this session is an overview of Zybion, who we are as a company, an introduction of facilitators, and some discussion around Calibration 101, along with a question and answer segment. And again, to ask questions, please use the GoToWebinar panel. You can ask questions throughout the entire presentation, and then as we get towards the end, our facilitators will field those questions by reading the question only, not your name and not your company, so please feel free to ask any questions you like. Before we jump in, briefly a little bit about Zybion as a company, who we are. The mission of Zybion is to provide a complete end-to-end solution set that maximizes the value, minimizes the risk in some of the most critical business processes. And certainly facility, asset, maintenance, management are critical processes at companies, particularly those that operate in regulated environments. As a company, Zybion was founded in 1977 and is a certified minority business enterprise. Today, we support over 200 companies worldwide with our experienced staff. We have solutions designed for autonomy, agility, and flexibility, and we offer a solution set that can be delivered globally. Our solutions are available both as products or as a service, as you'll see today. Today's facilitators, two top thinkers in the IBM Maximo world, Dave Chiaramonte, the Managing Director of the EAM practice here at Zybion, and Hank Galanti, who is one of our senior consultants. I'd like to introduce Dave. Dave, I believe you're going to start the presentation today. And as you introduce yourself, I'm going to go ahead and pass the controls of the screen over.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin. Hopefully everybody is hearing me and can see my screen. Kevin, if you could just verify that for me.
Yes, we can see your screen perfectly. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, great. So just to add on a little bit more around Zybion, around the enterprise asset management or Maximo space, just a couple of slides on my group. I'm the Managing Director of our EAM Services group here at Zybion. My group specializes in Maximo, and we work with all the various flavors and versions of Maximo, going back to 4 all the way up to the current version of 7.5. We do specialize in the mobile solutions area using the Cyclo suite of products, and we do a lot of extensive integration with external systems, including data migrations, real-time connectivity as well. We're very active in the Maximo community. We've just returned a few weeks back from the IBM Pulse conference out in Las Vegas. We're a member of several industry user groups, and we're an IBM business partner and reseller. And feedback, the general feedback we get from our clients is that we are very responsive, as well as passionate about Maximo, as well as most everybody else is who uses Maximo. Let me change my screen page now. There we go. Maybe not. Hold on, I'm just changing my screen. There we go. Okay. A little bit more on our Maximo services. We have extensive experience in deploying Maximo. Go back up, sorry. Am I going up? Up. I'm sorry about that. My screen is going a little crazy. There we go. We have extensive experience in deploying Maximo for solving a wide range of business challenges. We have expertise in doing upgrades, configuration, and customization, as well as testing the Maximo. We've worked with all sizes of companies, small, medium, and large. And we do provide turnkey project management to our clients. We can provide all turnkey solutions, whether it's for small, medium, or large projects. One of our areas of specialty is around providing assessments. We not only do Maximo assessments for systems, but we also do maintenance management best practices, including reliability-centered maintenance, as well as maintenance process assessment. We do gap analysis assessments, including as-is and to-be process design to help maximize your implementation with Maximo. We also provide training that is tailored to your specific needs. Among newer areas, we have just started offering support services. Again, these are tailored to your specific needs, including 24/7 support, on-demand support when you need it, as well as any sort of custom request that you may have. So with that overview, today's topics, the goal of today's presentation is really to give an introduction to the calibration features in Maximo. I believe we called it Calibration 101, and our goal is to really give you a basic overview of the key modules that you need to consider when you're trying to get Maximo calibration into Maximo. So we're going to go over these key modules, including data sheets overview, as well as standards of tools. We'll talk about how job plans are used in calibration, as well as show you examples of work orders and some of the out-of-the-box reports. We'll also give you some opportunities to talk about how you can migrate from legacy calibration systems, as well as what you need to do if you're starting from a paper-based or like a Microsoft Excel. Okay? Page down again. Couple of upfront disclaimers here, just to try to keep it clear to everyone. When we do some demonstrations today or show some screenshots, it will be on Maximo version 7.5. There are prior versions that use calibration, including the 6 series, actually even going back to 5. For any of you who are not on 7.5 yet, really the main difference is just they've merge the calibration applications into 7.5. So if anyone's familiar with the older one, you used to see what they would call these examples of asset and then the cal. That's gone. All these percentage parentheses cal signs are now bundled right into 7.5. There's still additional licensing that you will need, so I won't get into the licensing side of it. That you can speak to IBM about. And of course, the overall advantage of why you want to have calibration in Maximo is that it will give you a single system for your entire asset management program, not just your operations and maintenance, but you'll also have your calibration maintenance program integrated as well. We will highlight opportunities where you can migrate from your legacy calibration systems, if you have any. Examples of them would be ProCal, CalMan, GaugeTrack, just to name a few. Okay, so with that, there's some core concepts that you really need to understand when you want to start using Maximo for calibration. And I think for this discussion today, what we're really looking at is Maximo itself and its technical capability. I'm sure there are people on this call who are very well aware of calibration itself. You might be metrologists, and you may have a full understanding of the calibration aspects of things, but you just don't know how Maximo achieves the same capability. So that's what we really want to focus on today. So the 3 main things that you really need to focus on, and we're going to give you examples of this, is the first key concept is around what Maximo calls the data sheet template. So when you're in Maximo, one of the new options for calibration, you'll see something called the data sheet template. And essentially the data sheets are your templates that will define the calibration process for your asset functions. Okay, so this is where you're going to be creating all of your specific test points, your tolerances. Other systems call these calibration sheets. Some do call them data sheets. The terminology is synonymous, but this will be one of the main tasks that you will need to complete in order to go live with calibration. The second key concept is around your measurement and test equipment. Some of the common terms here are, either you'll call them standards. Maximo calls them tools. It uses its tool module to handle them. And there's a few different types of approaches that you can take when it comes to how you handle your measurement and test equipment. Maximo uses 2 modules for doing this. One is the assets module, so it treats all of your test equipment as a serialized asset, but it also allows you to link that asset to a tool master record. It uses the same concept, if you're familiar with the rotating asset concept around inventory in Maximo. it uses the same concepts for your tools in calibration. So you have a serialized asset that links back to essentially a tool item master. And the last key thing is the job plan association. What ties all of this together in Maximo is the job plan, and what they have done is they've added a new section to the job plan specific to calibration that allows you to associate, based on asset, the specific data sheet that will be used when creating a calibration work order. And we'll focus a little bit on this later about how you will design your job plans. It's really flexible as far as your business process. They really are going to be based on whatever your unique procedure is for doing calibration. At some clients, we see they have just one single job plan just to do calibration, and others could have, way more depending on the process and the procedures they want to follow. So that'll be something that you'll determine as you go down that process. Page down. This graph sort of, again, we just want to try to make sure everybody's clear about what the difference is for calibration compared to Core Maximo. So on this side of the screen, on where it says Core Maximo, this really encompasses everything that you already may know about Maximo from an asset management perspective. So you should already know how to add assets. You should already know how to create PMs. You already know how to work with work orders. So all of the things that you might typically do for asset management, regular day-to-day maintenance management, that's all going to be the same. You'll use the same capabilities going forward. So, for example, this bottom line right here, this arrow is saying you go from Core Maximo, you create a PM record, and eventually that gives you the work order. Where calibration comes into play is that those three modules that I mentioned in the prior slide, data sheets, tools, and job plan, those actually now need to be addressed before you can actually continue under your normal PM process. So in this case, you would still follow all your Core Maximo principles, and then you would start doing data sheets, tools, and job plan, and link those all to your PM, and eventually you would get your calibration work order. Okay, so the next series of slides we're going to give you are areas for preparation and considerations, things that we've learned through the years working with clients. These are all the planning and the tasks that you probably need to do before you really jump in and start using Maximo directly. So we'll go through that. A lot of this is going to be about the planning and how you're going to manage the data that you will eventually be putting into Maximo. For all of the various data that you'll need to use, we usually end up saying that a best practice is to be able to capture this information in some intermediate repository, such as, a very common one would be Microsoft Excel, where you're basically gathering all of the data to be eventually put into Maximo for calibration. How you really go about doing this will depend on how many instruments and categories, functions, and test points that you ultimately will have. So for example, if you're a small shop, if maybe you have less than 1,000 assets or maybe just a few hundred, the capability to do direct entry into Maximo may not be that rigorous of a process. But if you have 8,000 instruments and hundreds of data sheets and a few hundred tools, then yes, you probably should have some intermediate file, whether it's Excel, Microsoft Access, that will serve as the initial repository for that information. The other thing we want to just mention throughout this call is the terminology. So a lot of calibration shops, they'll talk about instruments. They'll say they want to do calibration on instruments. From a Maximo perspective out of the box, it's still an asset. So if you're used to saying instruments, in Maximo we'll be calling it assets. And during the presentation we'll probably use both terms back and forth as we give examples. Same thing goes with standards, your test equipment. Maximo is calling it tools. but the majority of calibration will refer to it as standards. And same thing, serialized assets. You know, when we get into some examples of how this works, it's the standards and really equal your serialized assets, like a very specific fluke meter, so as an example. So you'll hear us say this back and forth on these terms. I just wanted to make sure everybody understands or doesn't get confused over the terminology. Okay. All right, so for the initial preparation and consideration, the first topic that we want to discuss is for assets. And this is really the starting point. This is what we're recommending here is what you need to do in order to get started with your first set of data. In this case, it would be assets. And again, if I'm using the term assets, I'm also talking about instruments. So in this case, what we recommend is that you start to identify and build a list of your assets that you want to include in Maximo for calibration. You could use some sort of reference document to start collecting that information. For example, if you're doing this from a paper-based system or maybe just Excel, that would be your starting point. You would create an Excel file and you'd say, here are our calibration instruments. And it would be, you know, everything from the building blocks of serial numbers, model number, description, location, all the typical attributes that you want to know about a piece of equipment. If you have a legacy system, if you're using something like ProCal or CalMan, all of those programs do have some sort of export feature, or they run on some industry standard database such as Oracle or SQL Server. So you can also export from those systems the master data that will eventually be used in Maximo. So those are two of the most common ways of identifying and building that list of assets that you'll need. For those of you who are already using Maximo for non-calibration, so if you have a maintenance organization and they already have Maximo up and running and they've been using the system for a while, one of the things you need to consider is making sure that the data you put in will conform to whatever your best practices are for as far as naming conventions, syntax, or even locations. I've seen a lot of places where even though they have Maximo running and they have all of their location hierarchy established, their calibration system has its own location syntax and literally has duplication of locations. So you just want to be careful that when you're looking to merge this in, that you conform with your existing guidelines and procedures for this. This is probably one of the areas that take up the most amount of time as far as transforming that type of information. Okay, so that was the assets, where you would start with assets. The second area for preparation and considerations would be for tools. So this is to identify and build your list of your tooling or your standards or measurement and test equipment. The way Maximo wants this to work, the best practice for doing this is to define your tools using the concept of the rotating asset. This will give you the traceability that you'll eventually need for tracking the usage of these tools. And we'll give some live examples in a little bit, but to give you a little flavor of this, if you're not familiar with how rotating assets work in Maximo, what would happen is in the tool module, you would create a high-level tool record, sort of a master record, say, for example, a fluke meter. And you would also then have a unique identifier. Maximo is good at having unique identifiers. So in this case, we'll say 6001. That would be a unique tool number for a fluke meter. Then in the asset module, you would actually put in that serialized fluke meter that you're talking about. So you would create an asset record, put in get a new unique number from Maximo if you're using auto number. You would put in all your typical information like model, serial number. And what you would do is you would link it to something called the rotating item number, in this case 6001. And what this will do is this will give you flexibility for knowing what the high-level tool is that you need, and then later on when you do your calibrations, you'll be able to actually specify the specific in this case, specific fluke meter that was used to perform that specific calibration. And it'll be used later on when we get into reverse traceability type reporting. Okay. Around data sheets, so the last key module is the data sheets, and there's an asterisk that I put right after data sheets up there on the top right, and at the bottom left is my asterisk meaning. This is the most amount of effort. This is where, as you develop your program, this is where you're going to be spending the most amount of your time is on defining and putting your data sheets together for entry into Maximo. So what do the data sheets do? Some of the things that you're going to have to start to think about when you're creating this list of data sheets is you're going to start to want to define what your instruments are, and for each of them what their operating ranges are. So as you build that asset list, the list of your instruments, you're going to want to start specifying what are the operating ranges for these individual instruments. You'll then further go on to define more categories, such as what is this instrument? Is it a gauge? Is it a temperature transmitter? Is it a scale? So these are all the high-level taxonomy of describing what this instrument is. And this grouping will then represent your overall instrument, and then your data sheets that you create will be based on this grouping. And this will give you the flexibility to share data sheets across the common categories. Okay, so this concept, this is one of the building blocks of the data sheet. This is one of the first things that you really need to put some effort into is understanding how you can build the data sheets to be shared among these categories. The other thing around data sheets is you can have a decision how you number these things. Maximo will give a unique number. You can either choose to have an auto number. You can also go with a smart number if you choose. And then there's a description section that you'll need to think about as far as a naming convention or syntax to follow. So when you describe the data sheet, usually the best practices that we've seen is we start with the device as well as the input and output ranges. So this is an example on the screen. You might have the description called that it's a scale and it has an input of 0 to 10. And also an output of 0 to 10. And that is in the actual description of the data sheet itself. This way it gives you the ability to do some easy searching and finding data sheets for common instruments. Okay. Let me page down. The next area around preparation and consideration, things to take into account. Once you get into the data sheets, once you've got the description entered and what you really want to start building your data sheet for, the next requirement would be around your asset function. And for a lot of for those of you who are metrologists and involved in calibration, you should know specifically how to categorize these and what the asset functions would be. For the data sheet, minimum of one asset function is required. We do give an example here on the screen. For example, if the instrument is a gauge, so right here we have the instrument and it's a gauge with its input and output. The function in this case, we would have one function check for doing tension and another function check for compression. So there'd be two different asset functions that this data sheet will be performing. And then there's some other requirements as far as the input and output, and the data sheet will also allow you to define the tolerances. And as an out-of-the-box feature, there's up to 4 tolerances per function that Maximo does allow you to do. Okay. Moving on to the next requirement for a data sheet will be where you specify your test points. So these are your actual specific tests that you'll conduct during the calibration. So example, point 1 could be a 10-pound check, point 2 would be 20, point 3 would be 30. These are your individual specific test points that you're putting in. Okay. Just a note below, just a little bit of some upfront information for you. All of this information that we're talking about for this data entry There are some third-party tools, and we actually here at IBM have developed a tool for being able to load this type of data into Maximo. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, we do have the BRI tool, which is designed for taking the asset functions and the calibration points and having them loaded through, say, a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet directly into Maximo using BRI. Okay, so we're going to move to some examples and demonstration. And Hank, I think what we'll do, we do have some screenshots, but what I'd like to do is maybe turn it over to Hank to take us through some live shots of Maximo. And what we'll do is we'll start in the data sheet area just to give you some examples of how a data sheet can be set up. So, Hank?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to transfer you as presenter.
Okay.
Make presenter. Okay. And you should be able to share your screen. And if you could just take them through, I know you don't have the deck in front of you, so I'll just sort of coach you along with, but if you can just take them through setting up an example of a data sheet, just
Sure.
some common features, starting
Sure.
with naming and the asset functions.
Okay, will do. Greetings, everyone. My name's Hank Galante. I'll show you the demonstration here as far as the data sheet template itself. What you see is the common data sheet in 7.5. Looks similar, very similar to earlier version of Maximo. In order to create a data sheet, the functionality is to invoke the new record icon, at which point we will now start the process. The process has different sections of Maximo. The upper section is our header section. This is a function where we need to identify the data sheet. If the system was set up for auto numbering, the number would be populated. If not, you can have a smart system to identify a new data sheet. Again, with the description area, it's basically looking for you to decide how you want to describe this type data sheet that will be applied against all assets to be calibrated. You may have multiple assets that actually fit under the one category. So any type of data sheet can be used for multiple assets itself. So you're not really defining a particular asset, you're defining a process here to be calibrated. So again, if this is to be done as a scale, you identify it as a scale, you identify the range, and we'll put it at kilograms, and basically we'll look at the same side on the other side as well, input and output. So again, we define the process that the data sheet is going to be using here. All right. In this function, also, let me come over here and minimize this section here. We'll talk about that at a later point. So in the second row, revision, by default, since data sheet allows for revision control, the default revision to start a new record is 0. It allows you to enter a text. It's not mandatory, but if you want, you can enter a text in here to start the new process. Other sections here shows Maximo. If you are an organization or a site-specific company, then you can define the value here for site and organization. By default, if you do not fill it in, it basically can be used across the board. Also to the far right shows the status, current status of the data sheet and the status date here because it was invoked as a new record, but anytime the status is changed, you will see the date that it was changed as well. Our next section we're building is our asset function. So we're invoking a new row, and we're looking to identify various sections of the data sheet. Number one is asset function, a numerical value to identify at least one asset function. You may have multiple asset functions driving this data sheet. And also then we're going to describe the section here by giving it a description what it's going to be doing. So we're just doing the same thing. It's a scale and basically defining as 0 to 100. So in our section, when we start defining it, there are other options. We're looking for a calibration point since it's an analog type device. We're not doing repeatable on this. If you need an option to weigh a particular scale multiple times, the repeatable function allows you to set this option and then enter the weight or value to be judged against, and for a repeatable value it will repeat that same value, and if by example set for 5, it'll repeat each calibration point that many times. So if we have one set at 10 kilograms, it'll repeat 5 times at 10 kilograms, allowing the technicians to do 5 separate entries as far as calibration points.
Hank, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I do want to point out, so on this screen where you're seeing asset function and all of these specific areas and certainty data and input information, there's a lot of information that you can record about the specific data sheet. We're not going to go all into that on this call because we did say this is calibration 101.
101.
A lot of these other things are all more for advanced topics, plus are very specific to a metrologist's specific function. So really the takeaway here is just everybody, you can see there's a lot of information that you have flexibility of putting in. So I just wanted to highlight that we're not going to get into details on what the percent of span should be or any of that during this call. We're just going to focus on some basic minimum things that you need to do for basic calibrations.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so now we're setting our input information. We're looking at this scale being a value of 0 to 100, and we can set our value at kilograms. Again, we're looking at our output information. It is also set 0 to 100, again in kilogram value. So we define now our inputs and our outputs in this screen. What we need to define now is our tolerance limits. Maximo allows up to 4 separate, from 1 through 4 being tightest to widest margins. If you have simply one possibility of a failure, then you define the description as a failure. And if your tolerance range is basically a percentage or an engineering unit, you define it at this process. We're basically going to look at plus or minus 2, and we'll use engineering units. And the status, if it happens to exceed this, will be to fail. Okay? So from the basic setup, we are looking here at a complete asset function, a total asset function that is complete. We set a description, we told its calibration points, we gave it our input and output information, and we gave it a tolerance limit. The next stage to do is actually add our calibration points to this data sheet itself. Again, we invoke a new row. You may add as many calibration points to each asset function as necessary. Calibration point, again, is a numeric value, so we define it. And this one here, we're starting at, say, 0 kilogram as our first measure point. So our nominal input would then be 0. In doing so, then we see automatically that the tolerance range, because we defined it in units, is automatically populated, allowing the system, or you, the user, to see what the tolerance range is. you can keep building our definition for tolerance or calibration points, adding as many as possible. Again, we're looking to do this input, and if we continue, again, we may add a third at this point, and we'll go to full scale. We'll go to full scale. Okay. So again, adding your calibration points is defined according to either OEM specs or your metrology, whatever defines the calibration necessary.
Okay. Hank?
At that time, you basically save the record.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So Hank, the other thing, if you could just show them briefly, would be the Work Assets tab of this data sheet.
In tying it all together, we need to identify what type asset or what assets are actually tied to this data sheet. So from our Work Assets tab, we click our new row, and under our asset field, you define the asset that is necessary. Again, Maximo option allows you to open up a list of assets, and then you can select your assets that fit that need, or basically search from here for that asset number, and then by clicking on it, it returns the value. Now what we did, we created the data sheet, and we tied in the asset to this data sheet itself.
Okay. What this does, what the Work Assets tab allows, is later on, if you're creating a work order, for example, and you enter in asset number 26200 for the asset of the work order, when you actually go to apply the data sheets that could be used to give a selection back, it'll show you any of the data sheets that are commonly linked at that point. So it gives you a feature here to be able to get a good representation of what data sheets are for which assets. Okay, Hank, if you could go to job plans now, because I do, in the interest of time, I do want to make sure we get people's questions in. So if you could go to job plans, we can highlight how this data sheet can be used on a job plan for a specific asset.
Yes. Oh, one thing I forgot exactly is in the data sheet itself, in order for the data sheet to be present in any application, in order to bring it up, it has to be in an approved state. So real quick, we're going to go in and update the status to an approved state. So now this data sheet will be available to record in any other application. Our job plan here is as we're working now with the job plan section, if you have plans, you can create them. We have exactly different type calibrations. If you're creating a new, basically again invoke a new record. You identify it, and here we're going to identify this as a job plan for the scale. And if you need to invoke the size, again, to individualize. If you're looking for general, then it is to specify just a calibration procedure. As we look to identify, again, with the job, you have a series of tasks, okay, that can be designed for this specific procedure. Where the information gets tied together is under our Work Assets tab. What we need to do is define two processes. One is the asset that will be using this plan for calibration. Again, we bring up that asset and identify it. Then in our slower section under the data sheet, with this record selected, when we select a new row and we look for this data sheet, all right, we're looking for a value that's already been approved for this process. Okay, currently we show 3 data sheets that are tied in. You bring in the data sheet that this job plan will be used when this asset is called in a work order. The data sheet here now is associated and will automatically be copied right into the work order itself.
Hank?
So in order to tie the records down, we do so in this job plan under our Work Assets tab. We identify
Hank,
the asset and identify the data sheet to the asset.
Hank?
Yes, sir.
Could you just go back to the other tab for where the job task was?
Yes.
Okay, so this is one of the frequently asked questions: is how many job plans do we need for all of these data sheets? And the simple answer is you could get away with 1. You could actually just create 1 job plan and call it your calibration job plan. And your job plan tasks, which you see on the screen here, these are all your normal. This is typical Maximo capability. But your typical task might say step 1 is follow manufacturer's recommendation for calibration. Or it might say refer to your standard operating procedure for how to do the calibration. So, and that's all you need. You just need a couple of steps in there to tell you to go refer to something else. And then in the Work Assets tab, where Hank did that association, you could literally just associate every instrument you have with all of the specific data sheets that it needs. And once you do that, then what happens is once you create a work order for the specific asset, it will know based on the job plan which data sheet to associate. So the question of how many job plans, it really comes down to what is your process for doing calibration. If you have a specific step-by-step process for every type of item, whether it's a scale or a gauge, if you have individual steps and you want them in the job plan, then you will need to break out your job plans and your data sheets according to the actual individual steps. Okay, so we could go, Hank, if we could now go to the work order tracking. Well, actually, let me step back one second. So what Hank has showed you right now is that we do have a data sheet, and we do have the instrument, and we also have a job plan for this data sheet and instrument. The next thing that would typically happen is you would then just create a scheduled PM to generate work orders for this. The PM module, there's nothing specific for calibration that you need to know. It's your standard PM capability. So within the PM application, you'll create say, for example, a calibration for every 6 months, and you'll associate the asset number and that job plan and follow your normal work order management for creating work orders, whether it's through WOGEN, your nightly automated process, or if you manually have a planner or a supervisor go in and create the work orders. So Hank, if you just give a quick example of what a calibration, the only real thing in here to be recognized is the work type. They do give you the option for specifying that it's a cal work type. But other than that, this is your standard functionality of using the PM module that you would use for any other type of scheduling. So we'll make the assumption that this work order has been, in fact, generated from this PM. And Hank, if you want to go to work order tracking, then we can show what a calibration work order looks like.
Okay, we're going to actually create a work order here, and we're going to bring a data sheet into the work order itself. The process again can be either manually created, or you can actually have the system generated through PM. WOGEN process will automatically generate a work order, and because of that association of the asset and the data sheet in the job plan itself, it will copy the data sheet right into the work order itself. Again, as you're identifying the asset to be worked on, and when you're identifying the job plan to be done as well, and we're looking at a calibration job plan. So when a calibration job plan is brought into the system, it identifies it under our datasheet tab itself. We'll see that there is a datasheet associated to that record, and the datasheet itself will automatically copy into the work order. This process,
Right.
again,
So
is,
Hank?
yes.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody's at the same point. So earlier in the presentation, we created a data sheet that was called, we numbered it as data sheet 1002. So that was the template that contained all of the master information for the calibration. On this screen, this is the work order tracking screen. For those familiar with work order tracking, you see there's a new tab there called data sheet. So what happens is when this work order is created, that data sheet template gets copied into this specific work order. So everything on this screen you see now for that data sheet is all specific and unique to work order 1219. It's the actual execution of the calibration. So Hank will do some data entry here and point out some of the specifics that come up, such as status and the calculations that are done. Hank?
Yes, actually, you have to update the work order as far as being an in-progress state. I'm actually waiting for a server here to feedback, and there we go. Allow me to put it in progress. All right, now once the put it, whoops, reason, there we go. New work order. Okay, so now under our data sheet section, as we bring up the records, the technician, as he starts going through the value, will now be able to start filling in the as found and as left values, as found input, and then basically if he has some deviation, he can enter it as well. So as the technician goes through, he'll be able to click on each record and enter a value.
Right, let's just try to go through the as founds first, and
Yep.
just for time consideration.
Mm-hmm.
As anyone on the call will see, depending on how many points you have, the data entry could be significant. If you have more than, say, 1 or 2 points, if you have 10 or 20, or then you do have a significant data entry capability that you need to take into account. In some places, this is done on paper. So right, Hank's doing this directly electronically, but at some clients, they'll print out a work order for calibration that will have this information already printed on it in like a table and row format, and they'll handwrite the values, and then someone will do the data entry. Some of our clients will use the mobile technology, such as the Cyclo work order management system, so you can capture it through a smart device or a laptop or a pad.
Okay, so in entering all the values, when a technician completes all his as found inputs and outputs, based upon those entries, and if every value is within tolerance, the system will update the as found status accordingly. And because all the values here were within tolerance, this first as found pass has passed. All right.
Right. Now, I do want to point out there are system settings and other configuration options and rules that could be set. It is very common that if all of one of the settings that's very common is if your as found passes. So if all the readings for your as found have passed, you can have the system automatically copy them all into your as left as well. So you don't have to repeat them if they're all the same values. So just some of the features that you can do. The other thing is, a common thing is for your as found status for the data sheet and your as left status, you could create escalations in Maximo based on criteria. So if your as left status is a fail, you could have an email notification go out, or you could have a follow-up work order created through a escalation, or maybe even a more advanced workflow process as well. So those are all using the typical capabilities within Maximo, but that's just some examples of how you can use it here. So, okay. Hank, I think we have, from a time perspective, officially, we've got about 7 minutes left. So if Kevin, if you could, I think we just want to open it up to some questions, but essentially what we've demonstrated in the last 45 minutes was, you know,